Wunderschönen guten Abend, meine Damen und Herren. Herzlich willkommen im Kosmos. Ich freue mich sehr, dass Sie alle so zahlreich erschienen sind, weil die Alternativen wären ja groß gewesen. Schönes Wetter, Fußball oder Julian Barnes, der auch hier heute liest. Freue mich, dass Sie sich für uns entschieden haben. Wir haben heute ein sehr, sehr spannendes, berührendes, wichtiges Thema, das wir behandeln werden. Ich möchte mich zuerst mal bedanken, ein paar Leute. Mein Name ist Reto Bühler, ich bin der Veranstaltungsleiter hier im Kosmos. Ich möchte mich zuerst mal sehr, sehr stark bedanken an dem EDA, das Frauen, dem Büro für Menschenrechte, Sandra Lendenmann, Tamara Fernandes, alle, die hier sitzt. Herzlichen Dank für eure Unterstützung generell für die Sache der Menschenrechte, nicht nur, dass ihr uns hier unterstützt in der Kooperation. Ein großer Applaus bitte für die Menschenrechtler des EDAs, bitte. Danke. Wir kooperieren seit 2017, seit letztem Jahr mit dem EDA und haben verschiedene Veranstaltungen geplant, haben auch schon einige durchgeführt. Der Grund dafür ist, weil dieses Jahr jährt sich ja die Unterzeichnung der Menschenrechtskonvention zum 70. Mal. Und wir denken, dass vor allem jetzt, wo die Menschenrechte weltweit immer wieder zur Diskussion stehen, wo sie auch bei uns, sogar in der Schweiz, gewisse Teile der Menschenrechte in Diskussion stehen, finden wir das extrem wichtig, dass wir darauf aufmerksam machen. Wir hatten im November einen sehr, sehr berührenden Abend zum Thema Gewalt an Frauen mit einem Film, Belle la Meute hieß der, mit einer Diskussionsrunde, einer sehr versierten, kompetenten Gesprächsrunde danach. Dann im März hatten wir den Tag gegen die Internetzensur, den wir im Rahmen unserer Cosmopolitics-Reihe, die jeden Montag stattfindet, das ist eine Gratisreihe, wo also ein Bürgerforum, wo politische, soziale, gesellschaftliche Themen behandelt werden, haben wir dann durchgeführt. Dann natürlich heute zeigen wir einen Film zum Tag gegen die Folter und dann am 10. Oktober natürlich ist der internationale Tag gegen die Todesstrafe. Das Ganze wird sich dann so hochschaukeln bis zum 10. Dezember, da ist der Jahrestag. Da werden wir unter anderem das Human Rights Film Festival bei uns haben, wie letztes Jahr schon, und verschiedene Veranstaltungen im Rahmen dessen durchführen. Bevor ich das Mikrofon an Sandra Lendenmann-Winterberg weitergebe, vielleicht noch ein paar sachdienliche Hinweise, Selbstverständlichkeiten eigentlich, das Telefon bitte ausschalten, wenn möglich im Flugmodus, das wäre am besten. Dann werden wir diese Diskussionsrunde zur Information auch aufzeichnen, also nicht den Film, nur die Diskussionsrunde werden Sie auf Facebook streamen. Und danach werden Sie sie angucken können und wir werden sie schneiden und dann auf YouTube stellen. Das können Sie auch gerne natürlich angucken. Bitte teilen Sie das, bitte verbreiten Sie das in Ihrem Netzwerk. Es ist eine wichtige Sache. Dann der Film, der dauert 50 Minuten. Das geht relativ nahtlos dann über in die Diskussionsrunde. Und wenn Sie nachher noch mögen, können wir gerne noch Fragen beantworten. Ich gehe rum mit dem Mikrofon, fragen Sie. Und jetzt möchte ich gerne das Mikrofon übergeben an Sandra Lendenmann-Winterberg. Sie ist die Chefin der Sektion Menschenrechtspolitik der Abteilung Menschliche Sicherheit beim EDA. Herzlich willkommen.
Danke, Reto. Herzlichen Dank für diese wie immer herzliche und sympathische Einführung in ein eher unappetitliches Thema. Freut mich, dass Sie trotzdem heute Abend hier mit uns sind, trotz der, wie vom Reto genannten, attraktiven Alternativen. Sie sehen auf dem Plakat den Blick eines Mannes, der ein Stück Stoff in den Händen hält. Sie werden im Film sehen, was es mit diesem Stück Stoff auf sich hat. Mansour Omari, ein Journalist und Menschenrechtsverteidiger aus Syrien. Seit den Protesten im Zuge des arabischen Frühlings setzt er sich für Menschenrechte ein in Syrien, ganz besonders für die Rechte der Journalisten, für die Meinungsäußerungsfreiheit. Rastlos und sehr engagiert. Er wurde 2012 in Damaskus vom syrischen Geheimdienst verhaftet, als er sich im Büro der NGO Syrian Center for Media and Freedom of Expression aufhielt. Warum sage ich ihm das? Mit 15 weiteren verschwand er Journalisten und Aktivisten, unter ihnen Mazen Darwish, der Präsident dieser NGO, der heute hier ist, um mit uns zu diskutieren. Thank you very much, Mazen, for being here and welcome to Zürich, Switzerland. We're looking forward to the discussion with you. Mansour wurde während fast einem Jahr ohne Kontakte mit der Außenwelt in einem Gefängnis unter dem Boden festgehalten, unter unmenschlichen Bedingungen, gefoltert. Die Foltermethoden, die in diesen Gefängnissen angewendet werden, sind schwer in Worte zu fassen. Wir haben lange diskutiert, auch in meinem Team, sollen wir diesen Film zeigen, wollen wir diese Gewalt zeigen, die im Film vorkommt. Das Team hat sich dafür entschieden, diese Bilder für sich sprechen zu lassen. Diese Gesichter, so schwer sie anzuhören und anzusehen sind, müssen aus unserer Sicht erzählt werden. Das Stoffstück, das er hält, enthält Namen von Mitinsassen, die er zurückgelassen hat. Er trug diesen Stoff, als er freigelassen wurde, damit wir uns an diese erinnern, die vielleicht nie mehr aus diesem Kerker rausgekommen sind. Heute am Welttag zur Unterstützung der Folteropfer für eine weitere gemeinsame Veranstaltung des EDA und des KOSMOS sind wir hier zusammengekommen. Reto hat es gesagt, wir feiern gemeinsam 70 Jahre Allgemeine Erklärung der Menschenrechte. Die Allgemeine Erklärung der Menschenrechte bildet den Grundstein für den weltweiten Schutz der Menschenrechte, insbesondere auch für das absolute Folterverbot. Und das Folterverbot ist eines der fundamentalsten Menschenrechte, einfach zu erklären. Es gilt immer. Es gilt in Kriegszeiten wie in Friedenszeiten. Es gibt keine Gründe, um zu rechtfertigen, dass jemand gefoltert wird. Auch die Geschichte des Gefolterten, was er gemacht hat vorher, ist absolut irrelevant. Es ist ein No-Brainer, wie wir sagen. Dennoch ist es traurige Realität, dass in der Welt immer noch weit verbreitet gefoltert wird. Nicht nur dies, es haben in den letzten Monaten hat eine Rhetorik stattgefunden, die Folter wieder vermehrt legitimiert, die sagt, unter Umständen kann es nützlich sein, jemanden zu foltern. Eine, wie ich finde, sehr gefährliche Tendenz, der sich das EDA, die Schweiz, sehr entschieden entgegensetzt. Die Inhaftierungsraten steigen weltweit. Es führt zu überfüllten Gefängnissen. Dadurch werden Haftanstalten zum Nährboden von noch mehr Gewalt. Wir haben eine Rhetorik, die die Folter als Abschreckung von Migranten nutzt. Auch das eine Entwicklung, die wir mit sehr großer Besorgnis sehen. Folter und Misshandlung verletzen die Menschenwürde. Die Opfer werden entmenschlicht. Überlebende von Folter geben ihre Traumata weiter an Familienangehörige, ihr Umfeld, die Nahestehenden, auch Kinder. Nicht nur Individuen werden somit Folteropfer, sondern ganze Gemeinschaften. Ich zitiere dazu Jean Amery, ein Überlebender von Auschwitz und Schriftsteller, der schrieb: Wer Folter erlag, kann nicht mehr heimisch werden in der Welt. Amery hat sich das Leben genommen. Die Bekämpfung von Folter ist traditionell eine Priorität der Schweizer Außenpolitik. Bereits im 19. und 20. Jahrhundert, wenn Sie mir diesen historischen Exkurs erlauben, hat die Schweiz zusammen mit dem IKK, dem Internationalen Komitee des Roten Kreuzes, die Entwicklung des humanitären Völkerrechts gefördert und damit die Basis für das Folterverbot im bewaffneten Konflikt gelegt. Nach dem Zweiten Weltkrieg wurde dieses Folterverbot im bewaffneten Konflikt auch in die Menschenrechte integriert, auch in Friedenszeiten integriert. Eine Idee der Folterprävention, nämlich sämtliche Orte des Freiheitsentzugs von unabhängigen Beobachtern überwachen zu lassen, wurde in der Schweiz geboren. Es war Jean-Jacques Gaultier. Und wir wissen heute, dass dies eines der Instrumente ist, die wirken in der Folterprävention. Wenn wir Haftanstalten und andere Orte, wo Menschen festgehalten werden, systematisch überwachen, wird weniger gefoltert. Das ist ein Ansatz, den wir auch in unserem Aktionsplan des EDA gegen Folter verankert haben. Dieser wird in den nächsten Wochen publiziert. Die Prävention kommt dabei ein großes Gewicht zu. Auch in der Schweiz sind wir nicht von Folter, aber von Misshandlungen trotzdem betroffen. Aber wir haben in der Schweiz Institutionen, die sicherstellen, dass so wenig wie nötig, kann ich sagen nötig, dass eigentlich nicht gefoltert wird, dass wir Instrumente haben, die auch für Gerechtigkeit sorgen, dass es Rechtsverfahren gibt, dass es Instanzen gibt, an die sich Folteropfer wenden können. Das ist leider nicht überall der Fall, aber das EDA setzt sich dafür ein, dass diese Praxis auch im Ausland weiter verbreitet wird. Wir hören danach auch Stefanie Selg und andere Experten wie Gerd Schlabehock, die uns hier sehr tatkräftig unterstützen. Ich habe von der Strafjustiz gesprochen, die bei uns funktioniert. Sie funktioniert nicht überall. In Syrien beispielsweise gibt es keine Accountability, wie wir es nennen, weder international noch national. Die Schweiz unterstützte 2011 im UNO-Menschenrechtsrat die Schaffung der unabhängigen internationalen Untersuchungskommission zu Syrien, die bis 2017 von Carla Del Ponte geleitet wurde. Weitere Instrumente funktionieren weiterhin. Wir hoffen, dass diese zu Erfolg führen werden. Was zu Erfolg führt, was am Laufen ist, sind Verfahren hier in Europa, wo Täter dingfest gemacht werden, wo denen der Prozess gemacht wird, hat der deutsche Generalbundesanwalt auf die Klagen von Mazen und seinen Mitstreitern einen internationalen Haftbefehl erlassen gegen den Chef des syrischen Luftwaffengeheimdienstes. Das ist eine gute Nachricht, nicht nur für die Folteropfer und deren Angehörigen, sondern auch für jene tausende Menschen, die in den Gefängnissen in Syrien und weltweit immer noch von Folter und Misshandlung bedroht und betroffen sind. Ich wünsche Ihnen einen unterhaltsamen Film, eine gute Diskussion und freue mich auch in der Diskussion nachher Ihre Eindrücke und Erfahrungen kennenzulernen. Herzlichen Dank.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, also from my side. Thank you very much for coming and for your interest. My name is Christoph Münger. I'm the head of the foreign news desk of Tagesanzeiger, the media part of tonight's event. I have the honor to moderate our panel discussion about torture and all its implications. Before we start, I would like to introduce you with our panelists. First of all, Mazen Darwish. His colleagues appeared in this very impressive and I think very disturbing documentary. Mazen Darwish is a lawyer and journalist from Syria who has been very active in the freedom of speech movement. He has been arrested several times, in particular in February 2012, a year after the beginning of the Syrian civil war. Then Syrian intelligence forces, as we've heard in the film, raided the office where Mazen Darwish worked with the others. That was the so-called Syrian Center for Media and Freedom of Expression, that's your NGO, abbreviated as SYM. Mazen Darwish has founded this NGO in 2004. Darwish spent then 3.5 years in prison, where he has been tortured as the others we've seen, and we've seen that in this documentary. He also went on hunger strike to protest against the postponement of his trial. However, during this detention, Darwish was awarded with the UNESCO World Press Freedom Prize. Furthermore, there were several international campaigns to pressure the Syrian government to release him, which actually happened in August 2015. Today, Mazen Darwish is considered to be one of the most important legal figures in Syria. He is combating impunity by documenting violations and bringing cases to international courts. He is still the president of his NGO, the Syrian Center for Media and Freedom of Expression. He lives in Berlin, where he is about to prepare a lawsuit against the Assad regime. Furthermore, he has also been a long-standing part, as you've heard in the introduction, of the Human Security Division of the Swiss Department of Foreign Affairs. He says, it is impossible to reach a political solution in Syria without holding those accountable who carried out war crimes. Welcome, Mazen Darwish. It's a great honor to have you here. Thank you very much for flying. Just beside Mazen Darwish, we have Stephanie Selk. She is the advisor on torture prevention in the Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights at the Organizations for Security and Cooperation in Europe, better known for us as OSCE. She works mainly in Vienna, is based in Warsaw, she works there too, but today she flew in from Vienna, then to Warsaw. Thank you very much. I finished yet. Previous to this job in Vienna and Warsaw, she also assisted UN Special Rapporteur on Torture in Washington, D.C. She had also appointments in Kosovo and the occupied Palestinian territories. She's a lawyer too, of course specialized in international human rights. Stephanie Selk says, "We used to have a sense of moral condemnation of torture. However, the past 2 decades we have lost a little bit of the moral high ground." Welcome very much, Stephanie Selk. That brings me to the far side over there. That's Gerald Staberock. Born and bred in Tübingen, Germany, Gerald Staberock has also passed at the OSCE. He's actually one of the predecessors of Stephanie Selk. He also worked at the office there, I've been told, in Warsaw, at the Office of the Democratic Institutions and Human Rights. Gerald Staberock is a qualified lawyer too. Since 2011, he is the Secretary General of the World Organization Against Torture, OMCT, based in Geneva. This is a coalition of about 300 NGOs that fight against torture. He has spent basically his whole professional life in the field of human rights. However, as Stephanie Selk, he has become a little bit pessimistic. He speaks of a climate change that has taken place regarding human rights. Welcome, Gerald Staberock. Finally, I would like to introduce you with Thomas Meyer. He's a psychiatrist. He's head of psychiatrists of St. Gallen Nord, based in Viele, in Canton St. Gallen. Before that, he established and managed the outpatient clinic for victims of war and torture at Zürich University Hospital, and there he actually treated patients who had experienced torture. Based on that, psychiatrist Meyer is the author of several books about our topic of tonight. In one of them he writes, "The patients have experienced a fundamental and shattering of their assumptions about the trustworthiness of the world." Welcome very much, Dr. Meyer. First, in continuance of the documentary, I would like to talk what has happened to you in Syria. Then we will open the discussion a little bit and consider torture in a more general way. And finally, we will talk about possible treatments. And before we close that evening, you might have the chance to ask a question to one of the panelists. Mazen Darwish, I mean, that was a very impressive and I think very disturbing documentary. What does this do with you when you see your old colleagues from your NGO on this big screen again?
Good evening, and thank you very much for your time and for coming today. Actually, it's different impression. When I remember all what happened, it's not easy. But also when I look into Mansour and Mazen and to Maryam, especially to Maryam, and see how they are still fighting and still have hope, and I'm in daily contact with them and see how they are still believe in all human rights value and all of these issues, really I become very optimistic. What happened with me and the other, I think after this film, no need to explain. This is not an individual matter or individual case. This is the story of 100,000 of the prisoners in Syria. And this is something systematic and daily happened. Unfortunately now, while we are here, this has happened in Syria in many places. Torture, it's not new in Syria. I was in prison several times before 2011, but in that time, it's a tools to get information, to enforce people to speak, to enforce them even to sign about something they are not doing even. But after 2011, it's become not only about information. It's something like a punishment, a revenge, something as a tools to kill people, but not in the easy way, to torture them until they really, many times, all of us hope if this has happened directly. So this is maybe the new thing in this system. When I see the film and see how is the victim, and they try really to survive, try really not to get revenge, justice. When Mazen said that I will take my right by the law. For me also this has mean a lot. It's not about revenge, it's not about personal angry, but this is the only way to protect our society from revenge. If there is no accountability in Syria, we just build the stage for a new war. And this is very dangerous, and we need to be careful, especially now close to us in Geneva, while the negotiation, the UN and the government and the opposition, the Lord of the War, just want to ignore everything that's happened, just want to sign a public mercy and said, okay, everything solved, while we share the interest. It's about only authority and interest. This is very dangerous. No way to have sustainable peace in Syria if we don't solve all of these cases, especially disappeared, missing people. Maryam have the right to have a grave for her son.
Just if you allow me for a second to come back to your experience again, what kept you going? I mean, you were 3.5 years in this prison. What kept you going when you were behind bars? You talked, you were impressed by the optimism of the people that showed up. Did you have also some sort of optimism?
Yeah, I think this is one of the reasons that I'm still alive, that I still in prison and still believe that freedom, dignity, human rights, all these value, it's deserve. It's which make us human. When you live in such country or under this kind of regime, dictatorship, I don't think that this is a humanity things.
But I mean, you said that the revenge is not a basis for a future of Syria. But how do you feel about the people who did that to you?
You know, I write this while I am still in the prison, not in the security service. After 1 year, I transferred to the civil prison. Then I back to the security service again. But my lawyer smuggled a letter from me and it published, said that I hope for their children peace, good life. I hope to enjoy with my children. For those, really, again, it's not about revenge. I don't want to handle any one of them, to torture any one of them. Just we want a clever process that make the victim satisfied. Can't say that nothing happened. Truth is very important. Accountability. Even I know it's not possible for each one made a crime, but we need to add the accountability. Just nothing happened, or just let us check hand and that's good. It's not logic. Truth, accountability, victim need to be satisfied, their family, the dignity for those people who's killed in this way. All of these could be helped. But the most important, we need to guarantee that will not happen again. How we will go back to Syria. If those people, the leader, stay in their position, lead the same security service, and there is no guarantee that us who somehow we survived, could be possible to go again to death again, or to send my children. I don't think will happen. If we are seriously care about return refugee, we need justice in Syria. Only by this way refugee can go back without guarantee for their safety, for minimum those people not to be again tortured and kill the people. I don't believe that anyone will go back. Or I can start to speak about myself. In this situation, I will never ever took my children and go back to Syria again.
I mean, I think it has become very obvious that if we have a clear case, the regime uses torture extensively. However, on the other hand, it's also mentioned in the documentary we have the rebel groups, and you've talked about the future of Syria. Among them, the so-called Islamic State. They have also tortured prisoners. Are those crimes of the rebel groups comparable to the torture practice of the regime?
First, we are against any party who make any kind of crime. We stand with any victim, whatever they are, support the regime, support the opposition. Really, I don't care. And I will never ask about their political views or about their ethnic or religion or whatever. Any party, governmental, opposition, whatever, made a crime, they should be counted. But when we are talking about a governmental body, the state, the government, the Minister of Justice, can't compare it with a militia, how the militia act. Okay, we are against ISIS and Al-Qaeda because they are terrorism, and this is so simple, so easy for me. They are militia, terrorists, so they made this kind of crime. But with the government, it's not the same. The responsibility, it's not the same. And we are not talking about individuals. This is something systematic. From the president to the very low position. So this is difference. If we are talking about the numbers, minimum, I believe that 84% from the crime made from the governmental body. But in the principle, yes. And now we are prepare a case against one of the famous.
I'm just coming to this. Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, two and a half weeks ago, we had this, let's call it a first success, yes. Warrant of arrest has been issued for a high-ranking member of the Assad regime. It was also mentioned in the introduction. Jamil Hassan has been head of the infamous secret service of the Syrian Air Force that also took you and arrested you in 2012. Is this warrant for General Hassan now a breakthrough? As we would like to see it, or is it only a symbolic gesture that is useless in the end, to put it very hard?
No, this is very important steps, but just this case we already felt more than 1 year. Just I want to talk about Jaish al-Islam, which very famous and big rapper, and we are working and file a case against them. Just to say that really, whatever, who's the victim, we are with the victim, who's made the crime, we are against him. This case in Germany and the one arrest against Jamil Hassan, I believe this is very important, very practical steps, and this is also important for the victim and for the whole issue, that this is not a press release talking about the willing, about that this is shame or this is a crime. No, this is a practical steps. This means that we are serious. And this is mean a lot for the victim. And I believe that if we are the European country, American, everywhere, show this kind of practical steps from the beginning, a lot of these crime will never meet. The problem that those people, Jamil Hassan and the other, believe that they are untouchable, believe that there is nothing will happen, so they continue their crime. To stop this crime, first, we need to show them that we are seriously, we are against the war crime, against the crime against humanity, not only propaganda. And this is a very good example, I believe. It's also a very good message for the victim, especially those who's in Europe, the youth. The most dangerous things when the victim feels that nobody cares about him, living with his angry, with his painful, and no chance on justice. I think this is very dangerous, and those people, they are very ready to go to extremism. So in this kind of war unrest, this is very important tool to defeat ISIS or al-Nusra also. This is not something simple or easy.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, Stephanie Selk, you are an advisor on torture prevention. Regarding prevention, how significant is such a warrant?
Well, I would say, first of all, welcome and thank you for having me here. It is, as Mazen just said, it is not only for the victim, but in terms of torture prevention, it is a very important signal. And unfortunately, we still do have only few of those strong signals, but it sends the signal to perpetrators all over the world that actually there should be, and there is less and less impunity for their acts. So for future possible victims of torture, this is a very important step.
Gerald Staberok, I mean, what is the most effective prevention against torture? An arrest warrant that is maybe never fulfilled, or what do you think?
Well, it's very difficult to say what is the most effective.
Maybe you have to take it a little bit close.
Yeah, I think now it works, no?
No.
Okay. I think
that's better.
I mean, what prevents torture? There are many things. I mean, Sandra Lendenmann mentioned transparency. If torture is taking place in hiding, transparency is one of the cures, obviously. But I think it's very important that you have a fight against impunity, because you can train people, you can improve institutions, but if there's no red line that is ever shown, you will not effectively prevent torture. And I think this arrest warrant in Germany is very significant. I think in our work, at least, one of the most important things for victims is recognition as a start. Sometimes if we take up a case, that alone has a certain recognition for victims. And here that the German prosecutor, it's a sign of hope. I mean, we're so desperate. I mean, we've for years this conflict. We've probably all seen these pictures before, but we've forgotten about them. And we're so hopeless about the situation. At least there's a sign of hope for accountability, and it maybe is a signal that there's a long way for us to go, but it's a route that we have to pursue elsewhere as well.
That's the first step at least.
Yes.
I mean, Stephanie said you work for the OSCE, that's an organization with 57 states. Where and why does torture still occur in this big area, the OSCE area?
Well, torture, first of all, I would like to say, okay, we with this movie, we have seen a very moving and tragic situation of torture being systematically applied. The purpose in that case is to silence, to intimidate, to oppress political opponents. But torture really occurs everywhere still, unfortunately, for different reasons in various settings. So I could go on and on with the list, but maybe to
be as specific as possible.
as specific as possible.
She's also a diplomat, of course. Yeah.
Well, torture occurs to extract information. That's what we usually first think in our spheres here in Europe. That's what we think first, interrogation scenes where people are forced to confess or to give information. But I think this is probably, and maybe Gerald will confirm that, if you look at the global problem and also in the OSCE region with the 57 states, as you mentioned, this is the minority of cases. Torture occurs in the majority of cases in for instance, when it comes to the treatment of prisoners, conditions of detention that amount to what we call cruel, inhuman, degrading treatment or punishment, ill treatment. It occurs where entire justice systems rely on confession, which then obviously leads to the fact that coercive methods are applied during the investigation phase. But torture also occurs in completely different, outside of the criminal justice system, in psychiatric institutions, in youth detention facilities, basically everywhere where people are held against their will, where people are detained and cannot leave. There we look at situations of possibly torture occurring. And then for the purposes, it's the same. So we have a definition of torture which lists a couple of purposes that may lead to torture. So it's really to different degrees, to various, for various reasons in different settings, torture still exists and occurs everywhere.
So I try to be a bit more specific. Maybe Russia has been playing a very important role in your organization, the OSCE, and the Russian influence has strongly increased during the recent years, in particular in the area of the former Soviet Union. What are the consequences of this increase of power of Putin Russia for your work?
Well, you see, in my organization, so we are mandated basically to assist our member states to apply human rights standards. So we are not like Gerald's organization, an NGO, who can point the finger and point at the weaknesses and the gaps. We obviously have a very good overview of what is going on, but then my role in my position right now is to basically offer either expert advice, technical assistance to the government and also to civil society, but basically to governments on how to better apply human rights standards and how to comply with those standards. So I'm not sure I can answer the question with regard to Russia now, more because Russia publicly also condemns torture. So it's not.
Sure.
Yeah.
Who doesn't?
Yeah, exactly. So it's not a controversial
Even
issue.
Syria, I guess. Yeah. But would you like to add something regarding this question?
Well, maybe that. I mean, clearly, you mentioned that I said there's a climate change in human rights. I mean, the climate change in human rights is the discourse we have in migration in Europe. It's the discussion about counterterrorism, but it's also the new force in a way, and maybe because of the weakness of Europe and the United States, of Russia and China. And that's what you see in the Syrian example. I mean, the transferal to the ICC, if any case of human rights violation should end up at the ICC for what the ICC, the International Criminal Court, has been created. It's that type of situation, and it's blocked by Russia and China. And of course, you see an impact of Russia on torture in the region. You see it, for example, in the repression of civil society that work on torture, because we can think in terms of implementation mechanism about what sort of structures, laws, institutions we create. But in the end, it's people like him who are the implementation mechanism, civil society working against these abuses on the ground. And there we see a very, very negative influence of Russia exercising pressure on countries to adopt laws against civil society groups working on torture, trying to close them down, trying to make sure that there's no foreign funding supporting their accountability work, etc. So there is clearly also in Europe a huge change in my days when I worked at the OSCE was the late 90s. We still used democratization, there was hope of transition. Nothing of that is there today. I think it's a very negative impact that we see.
Regarding this climate change in a practical way, how does it affect your work with the NGOs who fight against torture?
Well, in many ways, NGOs are threatened with closing down. Some of them are prosecuted. People are imprisoned, as we've seen in Syria and other places as well. So it's a very practical impact. And who, in the end, are the people who work with victims of torture? It's local activists on the ground who provide assistance to victims, who litigate cases, who engage their government also on the reforms that are needed. If you close this down, you close down the voices of victims. So it has a direct impact on the work. And, of course, it also immunizes in a way the work at the international level, using international mechanism transferable to the ICC or others. Because those mechanisms, if somebody throws stones into the wheels, the wheel will not run the right way.
I mean, you have the overview. I mean, we've talked about Syria, we've talked about the post-Soviet area. I mean, globally, is torture on the rise again?
I think it's very difficult to say after, it's very difficult to speak about progress if we see the film on Syria. I tend to believe we make 2 steps forward and maybe 1 backwards. And I think if you look 30 years ago, I mean, certainly there are many places where there's more awareness that torture is prohibited.
Particularly during the Cold War, I mean. It was
yeah, and you have lots of countries that create institutional laws. You have also, I think this is very important, 30 years ago, the discussion on torture was a very Western issue, or was perceived as a Western issue. Now you have organizations all over the place with local human rights offenders who work on the issue of torture. As a movement, we've never been as global as we are today. But because we are global in parts and effective, there is a backlash, and those who don't want to see change try to repress civil rights defenders working on torture. I tend to believe we have advanced very much on laws and institutions. We have maybe more work to do on getting the public supporting the case against torture. In an environment like after the Cold War, where the idea was that states want to do a democratic transition to the rule of law, we could rely on enlightened governmental officials for gradual reform. But if that is not there as a pull factor, European integration, etc., we need the public to say, we don't accept torture. And Russia is an interesting example. Some years back, you had cases of ordinary citizens being picked up, and they are called the champagne cases, because they were abused with a champagne bottle. And suddenly the public said, we have enough of this arbitrariness. And suddenly the Russian government reacted to that pressure. So it's about mobilization, and I think we have much more work to do on this.
I mean, you mentioned that the fight against torture used to be a Western phenomenon. Today, we have also politicians in Western democracies. They do not dismiss torture completely. They insist that terror attacks, for example, have been avoided because inmates gave secrets away under torture. What do you say against this argument?
Well, first of all, I mean, you have something like the Feinstein report of the US Senate committee that actually said that this is not true. But even if it was, I mean, is torture effective? Is that the measurement of whether we accept torture or not? I mean, robbery is effective in some way, but we still have the crime of robbery. That's not the measurement. The measurement is that the law sets certain boundaries. And in terms of effectiveness, I mean, having worked for many years on counterterrorism and human rights issues, I mean, I think you see more evidence that the wrong abusive counterterrorism policies feed extremism and others. So I think if you make an equation in the end, it's rather on the other side that you create antagonism, you create support for extremist causes, and it does much more harm. And if you think about Guantanamo, the symbol that it's at to the world, it's everywhere. And every mission I do to countries where I meet government officials, I'm not American, but I'm asked about Guantanamo. It's everywhere. It weakens the cause dramatically.
It's become a symbol, of course. Yes. I mean, when we prepared this channel, we talked about, you mentioned, you used the term ticking time bomb scenario. That is, you have a terrorist in front of you and you know that other lives are at stake and you need the information in order to save those lives. Wouldn't this justify torture, Stephanie Selk?
Well, I mentioned that because this is precisely what I hear a lot now.
Oh yes, we hear it all the time. Yeah.
Having worked now on this issue for a couple of years, and I'm repeating the counter arguments, and I can just
please hear again.
No, I can just underline what Gerald already said. That first of all, do we want to argue? Do we want to enter into the discussion whether torture is effective or not? Also from a moral background? Is this how we want to argue? And the second thing I say, clearly not, right? This shouldn't be the measurement. Although I have to say, working a lot with law enforcement in different countries, when it comes to specific issues, like for instance, how do you conduct an effective investigation into a crime? I do also use the argument that if you coerce someone, if you beat someone up, the information is not reliable and you will use more resources to follow up on that, etc. So we do use it, but I still feel uncomfortable using the argument of the ineffectiveness of torture because it shouldn't be on a different level. Then the other thing I wanted to mention, this time ticking bomb scenario, it just does not exist. It's a theoretical construct that we all think that this is what happens. So then you have this person in front of you, and you know precisely that this is the bad guy, and now you need this information. But try to imagine what is needed so that this situation actually occurs. It practically never occurs because you can never be 100% sure that this is the right person you have in front of you. So if you go for this argument right now and say, okay, in this situation, I go for it, what does that mean? It opens the door. It opens the door to use torture as a means, and which at the end of the day, if you go through all the development that will follow, it will then make us also potential victims of torture because this person will maybe not know that you're not the right bad guy the day you will be in front of him. So this is basically in practical terms how I try to defeat this argument. But unfortunately, this has been used now over years, and that's what I meant in my statement. We have lost a bit of this universal recognition, acknowledgement that torture is just unacceptable in a democratic society. And because in the past 2 decades this argument has been used, and the fear of people of terrorism has been used to weaken the absolute prohibition against torture, which at the end of the day will make all of us potential victims.
I mean, Mazen Darwish, what's your view about this ticking bomb scenario? Excuse me.
It's happened with us actually when they attacked the office. I told to the officer that now there is no emergency law, so you don't have the right to come in this way. Can you show me the permission from the judge? And he said, no, because we told that there is a pump in the office, and that you and your colleague want to put it in a school, and so we don't need a judge permission. And when they took us to the Al-Mazzi airport, before we crossed the door, I told them, you forget the pump. It's still inside. You don't want to go inside to check or to take the pump? And he just laughing. Really, I see it even in Al-Mazzi or in 4th Division, while one of the prisoners tortured and told the investigator that, okay, I will tell you everything, what you want. We have weapons in the garden, and I can show it to you. I kill whatever, any name you put it, I will tell you that I kill it, just to stop torturing me. And he told me, I don't want information. Even if you have weapon, I don't want it. This is really happened. The person who's handled next to me in the wall while I'm handled. This bomb scenario, I think it's very bad excuse. And it's never happened. We can put a huge scenarios like this if we want just to say that, yes, we will use torture. We don't care about moral, we don't care about values. So any scenario we can put.
I mean, that reminds me of US Senator John McCain, who opposed torture very strongly in the 0 years with the Bush administration and Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo, because, I mean, he has experienced it as a prisoner of war in Vietnam. However, that leads me to you, Thomas Meyer. You have worked with patients who have actually experienced torture. What actually is torture? Is it already torture if a prisoner doesn't get a glass of water while he's being interrogated? Or, for example, is solitary confinement, is that torture?
Well, maybe that's a problem of definition, but in fact, for the person who is affected, it doesn't matter whether it is torture in a technical sense or not. It is, I would say, linked to a feeling of helplessness, to a feeling of being delivered completely to the power of other people. That's what makes the true sense of torture, and that's exactly the experience that haunts people afterwards. That's the feeling of helplessness, of complete helplessness. There's also the notion used in literature of mental defeat. That's a feeling that people have when they think, well, it's nothing that can be done now. It's
Actually, take care of the microphone. You have always to switch a bit. I mean, what actually your patients, what have they experienced, and is there was it possible to give them a therapy that helped them in some sort of a way?
Well, there are several levels that I want to maybe to address. I would say, first of all, you could ask if these people need treatment at all, because if you see people like you, or maybe also the persons that we saw in the film, you could maybe ask whether they are patients. Are they patients? Are they mentally ill? Do they need treatment? That's exactly what the people themselves ask very often, and very few of them actually are straightforwardly looking for treatment and coming to me and saying, well, I feel like a patient, I want to have treatment. As you have seen also in the film, that very often medical doctors are involved in torture. So that's very often something that also makes people more reluctant even to go to doctors. So that's completely understandable that they don't feel trust to medical person.
And the torture centers were actually in hospitals.
Yes.
Complete cynicism.
Yes. So also the medical labels that we address, or would maybe like to address to these people, are very often not easily accepted by these people. And I, as a medical doctor, I would never say to a people, you are a patient and you need treatment, if he or she himself doesn't see it like that. But nevertheless, we could say, maybe we saw also in the film, of course, that being tortured has consequences that might be perceived as symptoms. You know, we saw this man, and I don't know how you felt when you saw this man with the tears in his eyes. What different emotions you saw in his eyes, maybe? And I think it was anger, it was fear, and it was also maybe hatred, but also pain, of course, suffering. And re-experiencing also this kind of feeling of helplessness, and that's something that creates suffering. And suffering is something that is my business, of course, and I try to give the people relief. But medical treatment or even psychotherapy is only one means of helping these people, supporting these people, as we saw also in the film already, and was also mentioned by my colleagues already. What is very important, or sometimes even more important for these people, is the fact that torture is made known to the public. So it is important to testify, you know. And I, as a therapist, I am a kind of I'm testifying also. I'm helping people to give their testimony about what has happened. And many people, we know that also already from many Holocaust survivors, they said, the purpose of my life is ruined, but I still live on, and the purpose of my life is to testify what happens, and I want to live on just to not forget what has happened. And I feel that's very important also for you and all these people. We saw this mother, for example, we saw in the movie. I think she's deeply in mourning about the death of her son. But what is her mission now? What is important for her is to giving this testimony to the world what has happening. And so it is important for us also, for a therapist, to acknowledge what has happened, not to deny, because perpetrators usually deny. They deny. That's what we saw also in all types of perpetrators or presumed perpetrators that were taken to court. As far as I know, in the Den Haag trials, I think there was almost no one who confessed. They denied. It's just propaganda from the other side.
Same in
So they
Nuremberg,
denied.
of course. Yeah.
It's usually that there is denying, and that's deeply confusing these patients. I had many patients I was, treated from the war, the Bosnian War, and I realized that they were all following these trials in Den Haag. I didn't give it. I wasn't interested at all. So in the media, it wasn't covered because it's all already forgotten. But those people, they followed the news from the trials in Den Haag, and it was very important for them. And some of these people were deeply confused when they heard that this man or this woman just denied. They just denied, and it was deeply re-traumatizing them. So that's very important to testify. That's one of the important points.
I just wanted to ask, how do you react then, as a therapist, if it's not accepted they are victims of torture, and what can you do in a practical way? I mean, you said their lives are ruined. I mean, that's a very heavy statement, I think. Can you not give them some sort of a horizon as a psychiatrist?
I try to do this, but I would say I do this not only as a psychiatrist, or maybe not even as a psychiatrist, but as a human being. So I'm trying to approach them as a human being and telling them what happened to them is cruelty and is crime. It has to be persecuted, and I invite them to tell me. So I'm interested in their stories. That's the first thing. And many of these people didn't even tell their family members what happened to them. So I had many patients that told me that I'm the first person that heard their stories. So I think this is a very important moment for me, and I realize that I'm
a difficult moment, I guess.
It's a difficult moment, but I realize it is really important for me to be there and to stay there as a human being, as a representative of the world at that moment. And there is some kind, I would say, it is important for some patients. I take records, of course. I tell them that's my job. I take records of what they tell me. And of course, this is under medical secret, but still it is a medical document that remains, and some of them are interested in giving these documents also to court. So this is something that might happen, that I take the documents, I take the notes of what has happened to them as a testimony also, and I help them to reconstruct their story and to reconstruct the broken parts of their lives. So
they've got something in the hand. I mean,
yes.
that brings. I mean, the preparation of this panel, you told me that you don't like the term victim of torture. You prefer the term survivor of torture, and so I guess that's you help them to survive somehow. But exactly why do you make this distinction?
Well, I think the term victim holds the meaning of being helpless, of being weak, and I think that's exactly what these people hate. They don't want to be weak anymore. They don't want to be defeated, and they want to fight, and they want to resist. And the identification as a victim holds this meaning a little bit, and I want to help people not to remain victims. I mean, they have become victims at that moment when they were tortured, but they don't should stay victims for the rest of their lives. So they have to become survivors, and that's what is also part of the therapy very often, from victims to survivors. And I think these people are survivors because they survived, and they are usually they are not weak at all. They are very strong. In fact, they are the strongest. We have to always to realize that those who survived, maybe those are the strongest, or they were lucky because others died. Maybe that holds also the potential of feelings of guilt also, and many of the survivors have also feelings of guilt they have to fight. So that's one of the other feelings that might be entangled in this whole confusion of different feelings.
Mazen Darwish, how do you see yourself? As a victim or as a survivor?
Yes.
That's even more than a survivor. Eh?
I agree with what Dr. said, but also sometimes I am afraid that we use this expression to ignore that they are victim. So for me as a Mazen, I keep as a fighter, but I would prefer to say the survivor victim. To not forgetting that what happened, because also it's very important that the truth for the survivor victim, I think it's very important also.
Thank you very much. Maybe to come to a close slowly, I would like to ask all of you a question, and I ask for a short answer because we are running out of time. I mean, we have heard at the very beginning that the Swiss Ministry of Foreign Affairs is very active, the co-organizer of this event, and engaged in the prevention of torture. However, what can we do as citizens? What can I do? You are the specialists, you work with this every day, but what can we do as just ordinary citizens? Who would like to begin? Charles Stabber, or yeah.
I start with the easy one, yes. I think we're all ambassadors on this issue. I mean, I think public opinion is key, and we all have a role when we speak to people. Take the migration context here. I mean, tell the story that you heard today. I mean, when there's a discussion about people coming from Syria here to Europe, etc., I mean, many of these people have lived through this trauma. I mean, we can all, in simple conversation in a supermarket, we can be human rights offenders to some way. And some people might go one further and might want to engage with an organization, etc. But it's not needed. I mean, it's welcome. But I think we all have our own way of fighting rights. And I think for me, this film and your story is really reminding us that this is a fight not to give up, and that maybe it's a long-term battle we have to pursue, but one day there will be justice.
Thank you very much. Dr. Meyer.
I would agree. I would also say keep your eyes open and listen to the stories of these people. Listen to the stories. Listen what they tell us.
Yeah, and I would add, I mean, for us as individuals, we should not take it for granted that we live ourselves maybe in a comfortable position, and we cannot take it for granted that we are not tortured or ill-treated. It's an obligation of each and every one of us as a citizen as well to stand up and to reinforce those rights that we have fought for and that we are enjoying, all of us. And maybe just as a second closing remark, since this has been a very tough discussion, but in terms of torture prevention, I just wanted to mention that there are also the positive sides. And as Gerald said before, maybe we do 2 steps ahead and 1 backwards. For instance, now out of the 57 OSCE participating states, 39 countries have a national preventive mechanism, which means they opened their places of detention to independent monitoring. So to hopefully not let a situation arise as we have seen it in this documentary before. And then there are other examples of positive steps. So I think this is just also important to know that torture prevention works, and we can all work together and make sure that this will not happen again.
Thank you. Mazen Darwish.
Thank you. First, I think to start deal with the issue that this has not happened to the other. This is not not our business. This is Syria. It's too far from here. I think this is also very dangerous. This is could be happened if we accept it in Syria. Could be happened to anyone here. Syria is not too far. It's part from the daily Europe life. And what happened in Syria, it's directly reflect in Europe. So this is our problem, our issue. We need to work together to stop thinking that this is, okay, the refugee, this is their problem, their trauma, their country, their things. But if we accept this, few years we'll start hearing about torture in Europe. And maybe I'm wrong, I hope that I'm wrong, but I feel now when I listen to leaders like Trump and all other, not all.
I try to avoid his name.
Yeah.
I try.
Yeah. Really, I feel this is the same atmosphere which before the Second World War. Hatred, nationalism, identity, stuck to our identity, refuse the other. This is very dangerous. 70 years after the war, this is maybe make us forget what dictatorship could make. Democracy is not built in. We should fight for it. I'm afraid that after these 70 years, we start forget.
Thank you very much. Reto, do we have time for
Of course.
2 or 3
Certainly.
questions? Maybe who would like to ask a question?
There's a lady in the
Ladies
front.
over here in the front. Maybe introduce yourself and tell us who you would like to ask the question.
Okay. My
Thank
name is
you.
Ola. I'm a Syrian Canadian. Having listened to this, it was very emotional, actually. I come from Damascus, and my family is deeply rooted in Damascus. The discussion panel here and all the views that have been presented have renewed my faith in European ideals. Everybody, what they actually said, that the fact that you can have a people movement towards democracy and freedom and actually have it succeed is what was presented today, and I thank you for that. I want to touch on what Mr. Aktham Suleiman said, Mazen Darwish said at the end, which is very important for everybody sitting in this room here today. The survival of dictatorship regimes in wherever it is a grave danger to every society, to every civil society. I'm very proud of what he said. He said we should not accept this, even though we're living here in Switzerland and we're living in peace, we should never accept dictatorship regimes. Torture is a part of, or the building ground of what a dictatorship is. A dictatorship will never survive without torture. This is just one pebble in a huge mountain of rocks. We should. I'll be very enthusiastic and maybe have a lot of euphoria about what's happened today. If everybody in this room actually, once they leave, but they become tools of change, agents of change, if they elect politicians who will actually stand up to human democracies in the other world. If I may dare say, Europe has changed after the Syrian revolution. You've seen a flood of migration of millions of people. Europe has changed with ripple effects to Canada and the US. So it does really affect us right here. My message is that we all have a duty. We all have a role.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It wasn't a question actually, but it was a very interesting comment. Who would like to react? Maybe of no, maybe the panel wants to react on the question. Who wants to say something? Nobody. Should we just leave it there? Okay.
She's right.
Yeah. Okay, you get applause from the panel. Yes, please.
My name is Simona. I'm an Italian immigrant living in Switzerland. I would like to thank Mr. Meyer for the definition of torture that I have always been unable to put my finger on. However, it doesn't escape me for a second that, based on that, it seems that the international community is both perpetuating and renewing the state of helplessness and victim of asylum seekers. So, despite the overwhelming evidence, somehow something continues to be missing in the conversation, so that when we see such shocking photos, we all easily agree that it's torture. But when it comes to a family living in a tent for 2 years, and perhaps a child dying of flu after having safely crossed the sea, somehow I'm pretty sure nobody in this room consider ourselves complicit of torture. I would like to ask the panel, what is your view on this? Thank you.
Who would like to?
No, yeah, thank you very much. This is a very interesting point, and I just wanted to maybe add to the definition of torture that we are using. So just so that it's said once, it's inflicting of severe pain and suffering on a person by an official, and then there is also the element of purpose, as I already mentioned, and intent. So if those elements are given, we talk about torture. Then if it's on a lower scale, but still pain and suffering is inflicted on a person, we talk about ill treatment. And so the vast majority of cases in the context that you just mentioned would certainly amount to ill treatment, which is also illegal under international law, but in some cases then amount to torture. So I wanted to say the definition is quite clear. It's not that there is anything unclear about that, but the other aspect that you mentioned is the consciousness and the awareness of it. So I give over to Gerald for.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this definition that you cleared. That I think that's very important that we talk about the same things. I mean, that's. I mean, you made a good point, but it's maybe not exactly the same. Maybe one last question. Here in the front row, the lady over here.
Hi.
Hi.
First, I want to thank the panel for being here. Thank you very much, and for your amazing thoughts. I just want to say something just what Mr. Mazen has said, that the torture in Syria is not something new. This has been happening for over 50 years. And it's not torture for information as a ticking bomb scenario. It's just torture for the sake of torture. People who have their own freedoms, and of course that's forbidden. So I was thinking that it's history repeating itself once again. This has happened in 1981 in the Hama massacre that I'm sure nobody has known. I, as a Syrian, have only known about it for like 3 years ago. And what happened there, that were like entire family names that were eradicated. Like there's no more family name in Syria from that. And so one would think that, you know, we would learn from our mistakes. We would learn that from what happened from the Holocaust. But that's not happening. And because of something that became so hush, like the Hama massacre, we now know what's happening in Syria thanks to the media and thanks to Facebook and all those brave people that were able to post those videos. And so I was thinking, as a Syrian person who may never go to Syria back again, why does it feel like he's getting away with it? Because I'm not even talking about him, I'm talking about the small people under his hand that are actively participating in the torture. Those people may get away with it and not be accounted, not talking about revenge, just accounted for what they've been doing and still doing until now. So this is my question to anyone who has an answer.
Thank you very much. Very interesting point. Who would like to answer?
I'm not
Go
sure.
ahead, Joe.
I'm
Go
not
ahead.
sure I have an answer, because I think, for me, when I saw this movie, it reminded me of all that happened, and it makes me full of outrage as well. That there is no accountability at the moment, no major road for accountability. It just makes you angry, and you feel powerless. But I think what we have to do at the same time is we have to remind our politicians about this. I think we have to keep documenting for the moment that may come. And we have to insist on it. But I think we all feel the same rage and powerlessness to some extent. But we have to call for accountability.
But I think Mazen Darwish is a good example that we are not powerless, aren't we? you go ahead, you do something.
Yeah, but
Just for the last word that you get for this.
يعني, I agree. We are, as a Syrian human right defender, survivor, victim, whatever. We try to do our best, and we achieve many succeed in many level. Justice, it's long-term road. It's not about just pushing the something easy going. It takes time, it's difficult, it's hard, but it's possible. Just I want, building in what my friend said, give example from Iraq when we want to defeat Al-Qaeda at that time, just bombing Al-Qaeda, killing the leader, and celebrating that we defeat extremism. Without justice, without take care about those people, without really democratic change, with keeping regime like Al-Maliki dictatorship, sectarian regime, we create ISIS. If we are really serious about defeat ISIS now in Syria, this is not only the military act, it's necessary, but not only. We need to deal with justice, accountability, all of these things. Only in this way we can really say that, yes, we defeat ISIS or extremism.
Thank you very much, Mazen Darwish. Yes, please.
Can I just answer the second part of our
Sure.
Italian participant, because it wasn't answered? So with regard whether we consider it an ill treatment of the situation of migrants now in Europe, I just again want to add, yes, there is a big gap in consciousness and awareness and also accountability for the situation right now. But on the other hand, you know, there are reports from the European Committee Against Torture that has been visiting a lot of places, from the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, and other bodies. So it's not that it goes unnoticed. I mean, it's documented and it's discussed as well. And the second thing I wanted to say, well, now how we deal with it and how this translates into an improvement of the situation, that's something we have to work on. And then for Italy, for instance, you know, I just had an event last week where someone from a rehabilitation center for torture victims was participating, a doctor as well. And it was just good to see also how on the ground little initiatives then make a contribution to improve the situation. So it's not that we are helplessness. And just the final word on our governments, as it was mentioned. That's our responsibility also to tell our governments on how to stand up against torture and other human rights violations. And in the example of Switzerland shows torture prevention has been high on the priority for many years now. And Switzerland has found a way to influence not only the UN and regional organizations like the OSCE, but also on bilateral levels. The prohibition against torture remains always a key point for Switzerland's foreign policy. So those are different ways on how we all can work together to hopefully a torture-free world at the end.
Thank you very much for this optimistic conclusion, Stephanie Selg, Gerald Staberock, Thomas Meyer, Mazen Darwish. Thank you very much for coming here to Zurich and discuss this difficult and also disturbing topic. Of course, we have to thank you that you have come this evening, this summer evening, and to confront yourself with this really difficult and disturbing topic. It's not an entertainment. It's really you face something which is difficult, which most of the people try to avoid, which is understandable too, but still, as you said, the people might leave this cinema as little ambassadors in the prevention of torture. Thank you very much. Have a safe trip home. Good evening.